Opening doors to real estate and finance. A different gang today, but the same name sort of speaker here. And we have Mr. Gary Castle here once again. Gary, how's it going?
It's going great, man. You're looking good today.
I am.
You are looking good, and we are -1 today. I am Gary Castle, broker owner of Berkshire Hathaway Keystone Properties, 215-450-2373. I am going to give 2 shout-outs to the same person, Matt. Is that okay with you?
I love it. Let's do it.
Good.
Same one.
I'm going to shout out to my very, very dear friend Vince Sirianni, who celebrated a birthday on Wednesday of this week. Now, he probably didn't want me to tell the listeners how old he is.
Let's do it anyway,
he is
though.
46. So, Vince, I don't care if you didn't want me to say that because you are not here with your boxing gloves either on or off in the arena, okay? And I'm going to give a second shout-out to my very dear friend Vince Sirianni from GMH Mortgage. I almost forgot that.
I say you were plugging the promos before we went on air.
You're right.
Yeah.
And he's down in sunny Florida, Clearwater, checking out the Phillies. I think the Phillies are, heading in the right direction. Seems like they're getting some veterans and some younger players, and they've got some good pitching prospects in the minors. So hopefully they're going to be in their rebuilding, and hopefully they're there at this point. So anyway, the last couple of weeks I've been tuning into this show today because we are going to be talking about Stucco, and I'm so pleased to have a friend of mine, Mike Spadaccini, here. He's going to answer a lot of questions, tell us all about Stucco. So, Mike, please introduce yourself, tell us who you're with, and how do we reach you?
Gary, thanks for having me here today.
Absolutely.
My name is Michael Spadaccini. My firm is Michelangelo Masonry. We've been around since 1987. We're now redirecting, and we've been specializing in the world of stucco inspections. You can reach us at 215-378-2056, or sometimes it's easier just to catch us at stuccotesting@gmail.com.
All right, stuccotesting@gmail.com. That's very, very easy to remember. So, Mike, again, thanks for being. We call this the arena, and I do not have boxing gloves on because Vince is not here today. Okay, so there you go.
We're just sparring today, I guess.
That's right. So, Mike, what caused you to choose this line of business, and what were you doing prior to doing stucco inspections?
So, 15 years, I've been in the masonry business since 1987 as a business, started when I was 17, I'm almost 56. I started seeing the redirect probably 10 years ago, 15 years ago, as a masonry contractor, non-inspector. I saw the growing request of a lot of the relocation firms that were asking me to go out and perform a simple test to determine, is this the real stucco or was this the fake stucco? They didn't know what that meant, but as a masonry contractor, I knew the distinction of what that was. 5 years ago, I really saw the awareness in our region. My wife's a realtor with Berkshire Hathaway, and I saw the growing concern and the need for stucco inspectors. They existed down south, Carolinas, Florida, Texas, because the original awareness of the stucco concern had really manifested itself 10, 15 years before it had come up north this way.
And I think you had said around 2004 is when the South really had some bad issues with improper installation, and then it just came up north. And when would you say it really became an issue in like the Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland area?
It was growing in that the boom of the late 1990s and early 2000 was a sort of a mass run on a lot of newer products that were being installed. So it wasn't the classic issue that they were having down south where there was a failure of the product because they weren't using the entire system. They were using various components and calling it the name. We were experiencing a new method of installation of windows and lack of flashings that were traditional, changing of some of you hear the term substrate, which is the composition or the board where the wire lath and the stucco is applied. They started changing some of the components that were used up north here for decades. They also started wrapping the building in different building products that weren't breathing. Stucco is a porous product, and it needs to have breathability. It needs to have a vapor exchange.
Okay.
So these combination of flaws or design changes that were supposed to be better for energy efficiency were now starting to manifest themselves in early 2000.
Okay, so what kinds of stucco applications are there, Mike? And for example, let's say I'm building, because we have a lot of listeners that have houses that have stucco, that they have no intention of selling in the near future. Okay, we have listeners that are going to be buying houses. Spring market's right around the corner. It's going to be very, very active. Again, lack of inventory. It's a strong market right now that are going to be buying houses with stucco. There's going to be individuals that are going to be building a new home. Some are in an agreement of sale now where the builder is going to be installing stucco. How do you know that stucco is going to pass inspection and or be installed properly?
So what's happening today is there's a real movement towards pre-listing stucco inspections. A brief data point, 3 years ago, as the awareness became sort of constant for all real estate offices to manage, they were becoming aware of this issue, and now there were more stucco inspectors available. Initially, there was a lot of resistance from sellers, and they were waiting as traditional. The buyer comes out and does a home inspection. Mm-hmm. Being that most home inspectors do not do the stucco inspections, there became this disbelief by sellers initially. So a data point that I have is in the end of my first quarter of 2015, the majority of our work, and specifically 92% of it, was driven by home inspections, requesting buyers to have a post-inspection or a stucco inspection performed by us.
Okay.
1 year later, the awareness campaign from all the realtors like you and the whole industry really understanding this promoted that in 1 year change, the end of quarter one in 2016, 85% of the work then became seller-driven pre-listing. And I think that's indicative to this day, 2017.
Mike, that is a tremendous point, because I've mentioned so many times on this show before that if you have private septic, or you have private water or stucco, okay? If I'm a seller, I want to know what are the issues that I'm facing before I sign an agreement of sale where I'm locking the price in. Example, let's say I have a stucco house and I sell my house for $350,000, and buyer does an inspection, a stucco inspection, has you perform the inspection, and there's $50,000 worth of remedial repairs that have to be done. So do you think that buyer is going to say, well, I'll raise the price to $400,000 because seller, you're paying $50,000, okay, to remediate the stucco? Absolutely not. They have tied the price in. The price, in my experience, will stay at $350,000, okay, and that's a seller problem because, you know, they didn't realize that they had a stucco issue. Had they done a pre-listing stucco inspection, that could have been worked into the equation. So that's what you're finding, is you're finding most of your business now is pre-listing inspections.
Yes, that's
okay.
A good point.
All right.
Yes.
Now, so let's say you're doing an inspection, Mike, and can you ever determine by a visual looking at the house whether you don't even have to do any further evaluation? It is gone, it's done, the stucco has to be removed and replaced?
There are, in certain cases, the visual aspect of stucco inspection, first of all, is what we do at any inspection. Whether we're doing an invasive protocol that's been predetermined or whether we're just going out there for a look-see. There are times as a seasoned masonry contractor, not as the inspector, but as the masonry contractor, there are things that are very visual and telltale signs of things that are much more drastic and dramatic, and you can see them, and so can the clients.
Okay.
So there's times where we'll do a cursory view of the perimeter of the home and see things like staining, like cracking, but there are some times where there are visual breaching, where you can see the wire lath exposed, you can put your finger through a hole in something and there's rotted wood. You know those things. That's very rare that we encounter it, but it does happen.
Okay. Now, Mike, I had a situation several months ago, and I explained this on the show as well, where I was representing a seller, and the buyer's agent, who was from another office, put in the inspection contingencies buyer to pay for stucco inspection. When the stucco inspector got out there to inspect the house, his intention was to drill the holes to see if there's anything behind, the stucco. The seller said, absolutely not. read your agreement of sale in Pennsylvania. It says non-invasive inspection. Okay, and folks, you know, if you're practicing in Pennsylvania, you're not allowed to invasively inspect under any of those inspections. So what is your answer to that? I mean, is it possible in many cases to do an evaluation without doing the drilling? And sometimes I hear homeowners saying, well, yeah, but I don't want them to drill into my stucco because A, they might cause damage, and B, I might have an aesthetic problem. How can you match the filling in of those drill holes? So what are your thoughts on that?
They're statements that I encounter every day. With respect to your first question or statement, any inspector that's going to a home should never arrive to a home and the seller, if it's the seller's that's not hiring him and it's truly the buyer in that scenario, the seller should be given some sort of form, not just the Pennsylvania Agreement of Sale form. They should be having their own, each inspection firm should have their own explanation in brief of what's being done and distribute it to the buyer and the seller and have authorizations for those ahead of time.
Okay.
To know a little bit about the stucco, there are certain non-invasive program that can be done, but you need to know what system it is.
All right,
and there's
so
two big
explain
distinctions.
that.
Yeah,
Explain
there's
that.
two
Go
big
ahead.
distinctions. What we encounter here in our region is what we call hard coat stucco. It's more traditional. It is not applied over block or poured concrete or brick, but it's applied over a wood substrate, plywood sheathing, OSB, which is oriented strand board.
Okay.
They're the primary method of substrate installation in wood frame. You have wire lath, you have 3 applications of a Portland cement product which make up hard coat stucco. Scratch coat is the primary, it's 3/8 thick. It needs to dry, cure, and crack weeks at a time. Second application is a brown coat or a color coat,
Okay.
also 3/8 in thickness. And then the last, as each one of these cure, is the final coat or the texture and color. In the world of EIFS, which some people generically called drive it.
Yeah, what's EIFS mean?
EIFS is exterior insulation finish system.
Okay, thank you.
And it's a more recent phenomenon. It came in the late 60s, and it is a styrofoam or a polystyrene foam system with a very thin acrylic resin that's called drive it or other manufacturer named like that. So certain products, like an EIFS system, can be used with an infrared method. You can actually do thermal imaging.
Okay.
And potentially limit the amount of invasive inspection.
But then with the infrared, then if you're determining that there might be some moisture, because that goes, I guess, through the layers, then that's when you would recommend the drilling.
The probe test.
Okay, got it.
So you use that as a secondary. The primary on a true EIFS system, most homes in our region are not. You usually see it more commercially.
Okay.
You'll drive by it today as you're seeing banks and small shopping centers being built. That's classically an EIFS system. In the EIFS world, if you find an anomaly or you find an area via thermal or via this other wall meter device without pins on it, you then will, once you find that moisture, you will then do the same invasive probing, drilling, moisture resistance.
Now, are there any types of stucco that you've come across that are problematic, or is it as long as it's installed properly, then any type of stucco system is acceptable?
Yeah, I think all stucco, regardless of whether it's an EIFS system or whether it's a true hard coat system, they require maintenance. And if you've got a system that's probably from 2004, which was the major revision of the code of IRC, which is the International Residential Code, governing body similar to the Building Code of America,
Right.
known as
Got it.
BOCA.
Okay.
You'll find that a lot of the new prescription for giving stucco the best advantage of draining and breathability and isolating areas to keep run-on joints or run-on areas at a minimum. You'll find that most stucco, does and fares well. Some of the older homes that you have, maybe that predate that, they all still need to be maintained.
All right, so explain how you need to maintain. So let's say I've got a stucco home that dates 18 years ago. What should I be doing on an ongoing basis from a maintenance standpoint?
We have clients that have homes that are 30 years old, and we have clients that homes that are brand new built. A lot of them will ask us to come out like their pool person opening up their pool for the season. We come out once a year and we do a visual inspection because we've already performed an invasive protocol. We've got photo documentation, moisture mapping, etc. And we've done that, and now each year we look for anything that may have been monitored the year before, and maybe it's become more excessive and more visual, and we'll make recommendations to have that repaired, or something as simple as caulking and maintaining windows, clearing debris from gutters, and also making sure that the gutters and downspouts are properly contained.
Right. Now, if you're doing a yearly inspection, what is the estimated cost? I know it's going to vary, but what's the estimated cost to do a inspection for, let's say, a real estate transaction? A seller wants a pre-listing inspection, or a buyer wants a inspection, and what would be roughly the cost of just doing a yearly visual inspection?
On a average 3,500 square foot home, one chimney, on average, it's about $1,100 for a full invasive stucco protocol.
Okay.
Moisture mapping, resistance of the substrate testing, that's just as needed data as the moisture readings, photos, suggestions, and a summary, a full written report.
Okay.
To do somebody's annual visual, we usually walk around with the homeowner. It takes us about half an hour. That's usually $75 to $125. It's actually a very nominal fee, I believe, for getting the homeowner more aware that it is an annual maintenance.
Right.
And I think people were sort of falsely deluded in the past that it's stucco, it's maintenance free.
All right.
Nothing's maintenance free.
So somebody that owns a home that they don't have any intention of selling, it would probably make sense for them to get a stucco inspection, because eventually the house is going to be sold. And if there are issues now, address the issues now rather than it, getting into a much more serious problem at some stage in the future.
Yeah, I've also been tracking that other piece of data in that right now I also have a growing amount in the last quarter of 2016. Again, with that awareness brought forth by a lot of the real estate community like you, we've found that this peace of mind is actually how I list it in my data. And there's a growing of that. Michael, I'm not selling my home.
Right.
I just want to know. We're thinking about doing an addition, and before I do any matching paints or anything else, I would like to know.
Okay.
And I've seen that growth, and that, again, is the community awareness. I think it's hard to walk away from something when you see your next-door neighbor, or you come into a community and you see two homes with scaffolding from top to bottom. It's a pretty good visual that, hey, maybe I should check on my home.
Exactly. And folks, if you're building a home, with almost every new home that I sell, I recommend inspections at different stages, because I know the townships and the boroughs and the municipalities are going to have inspections at different stages, like electrical, plumbing, and drywall and things like that. But are they really representing the purchaser in that property, or do you need somebody on your team to watch out for things that are being done during the construction stages, and you can see whether that stucco is being processed or installed properly before they close up the walls? I mean, wouldn't that make sense?
It does make sense. That's also a growing segment as well. Initially, everything was just find yourself a stucco inspector. Secondly, how about a remediation contractor? Now it's to the point, the awareness, again, the continued education of the community is initially, if you have a new home being constructed or if you have repairs being done, typically there's some sort of zoning permit or something that's being done by the local township at some inspection level. Mm-hmm. In new construction scenarios, there is a specification of materials along with the contract and the drawings, the blueprints that have been designed by the engineer/architect. So they should be reviewed by the local municipality that's given you the building permit. Okay. Additionally, we're asked sometimes to come in as the disinterested third party to come out and monitor the remediation company in terms of repair. We're not offering any warranty. It's their work, but we're there to sort of oversee what's going on and photo document the process. In the world of new construction, we're there to photo document the process.
Okay, good. And then sometimes we have situations where if I'm representing a buyer, let's say a seller has provided me with a pre-listing report, Stucco report, and I'm representing a buyer, and the buyer says, well, should I just waive this inspection? Because the seller has already provided me with a report. There were some repairs that had to be done, and then the seller fixed the items that needed repair. Well, I'm not going to answer that question from my buyer client. I'm going to say, look, I strongly recommend you to do your own stucco inspection to make sure that there wasn't something that the seller's inspector missed. I mean, do you sometimes see that where there's already a report provided to you, and then you're doing a subsequent report just to verify that the first report is accurate?
That's also a growing phenomenon. A stucco inspection done a week ago on behalf of a seller who listed. We're in the spring market. Now you have a buyer that comes in and wants to bring their guy.
Right.
So that second inspection actually happens. It may corroborate what my findings are. They may have deviated and gone to another area and found moisture in a location we had not. There's no guarantee or warranty of this, but it's a protocol standard that we all employ.
Okay, good. Looks like we're taking a break, Matt, so please take her away, and we will continue our discussion with Michael Spadaccini. Sorry about that.
Take a stand.
Take a stand.
Take a stand.
Like my brother did, when he wouldn't take no for an answer.
Like my wife did, when she asked the right questions.
Like my friend did when she made the call.
You stood by us when we were in uniform, so stand by us now.
Take a stand for those who served our country.
If you're a veteran in crisis or know one who is, the confidential Veterans Crisis Line is here for you. Call 1-800-273-8255 and press 1. Chat at veteranscrisisline.net or text 838-255.
Elegant ambiance, sophisticated decor, award-winning Italian cuisine and wine. Davio's Northern Italian Steakhouse. Located in the historic Provident Bank Building in Center City, Davio's is a Best of Philly Award winner. Executive Chef David Boyle creates seasonal dishes as well as signature favorites such as the Davio's Natural Prime Brand beef steaks, award-winning veal porterhouse, fresh seafood, and handmade pastas. Davio's, 111 South 17th Street in Philadelphia.
Hello, this is Vince Sirianni from GMH Mortgage and your host to Opening Doors to Real Estate and Finance, inviting you to join me and my co-host Gary Castle, broker-owner of Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, Keystone Properties, every Thursday morning, 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. here on 1490 WBCB, and also Sunday mornings, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. on 610 Sports Radio. Opening Doors to Real Estate and Finance, helping you acquire your dream home.
Back in the arena here, Opening Doors to Real Estate and Finance. But today, I think we're just sparring, Gary.
Yeah, we are. This is round number 2, and I don't have the boxing gloves on because my buddy Vince Sirianni is in the Sunshine State right now, enjoying watching the Phillies rebuild and having a good time. So, Vince, we miss you dearly, but we will see you next week. And I want to tell you that I also have about 6 questions already prepared, Mr. Vince, on my agenda for next week that I've been asked by listeners and by realtors alike. So,
how many are intrusive, Gary?
4.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Perfect. All right.
Good deal. So, Matt, good having you with us today. So, again, Mike Spadaccini, Stucco Inspector, is our guest speaker today. I'm so glad to have you here. It's been exciting for me to get some of these questions answered. So how do we reach you, Michael?
Gary, you can reach me at 215-378-2056, or it's probably easier just to send an email at stuccotesting@gmail.com.
Stuccotesting@gmail.com. Awesome. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the invasive inspection and repairing those areas that are drilled. Because again, we get constant comments from homeowners that I'm just afraid that that's going to cause more damage to my house, and you're not going to be able to match up, the colors, and it's going to be aesthetically unpleasing. So what's the process that you need to follow to try to help to alleviate some of those concerns of that homeowner?
The protocol that we adhere to is a method by EDI, which is Exterior Design Institute. They're the think tank that has created this. So they have a group of people that have replicated the problems to understand moving forward so the industry doesn't experience this again. Okay. So the protocol is primarily, we have found that the most moisture intrusion takes place at three main areas. One is below windows, and windows classically, if they're not sealed or flashed properly, moisture can lay on the window sills and work its way underneath the apron of the window. Second area is what's called a kick-out flashing, or a lack of a kick-out flashing, and that's the convergence of where roof and gutter and stucco meet. And the third is what we call capillary. It's a wicking effect that comes from the ground. And so stucco that's maybe covered by too much of mulch mounding or improper grading, these are the three areas where moisture intrusion occurs. So the protocol that we follow is drilling under these windows. It's a 3/16, like the size of a thermometer, and we drill an inch apart, and we put the probe into these key locations, and it registers moisture, percentage of moisture, and the allowances as it compares to today's new code. The second thing that's probably just as paramount is putting a separate device that's called an SRT. It's a structural resistance tester, and it is pushed into that same probe hole to determine the resistance or the firmness or sometimes lack of. The third thing we do is
there's damage in the
see if
back
there's any
of the,
damage.
Okay, got it.
So even if the moisture reading may be low, it may not be registering on the probe because there's nothing there. The wood rot has occurred, and it gets a low number. So you just don't do moisture readings. It's a combination. You have to do the resistance testing, which primarily should read about 38 to 48 pounds of resistance directly when pressed on that substrate. Okay. And then the last thing we do is we actually measure the thickness. We use a small gauge, and we measure the overall thickness of the stucco. Sometimes it can be what we call a one coat, where they've kind of done everything in one as opposed to the three coats that we talked about previously. Okay. So once we're done with that, we are prescribed to use the low modulus, or what's called 100% urethane. It's not your over-the-counter hardware product. It's commercial grade, and a matching color is pretty much injected into these small sites. They're usually not obvious. We try to do some other things as being a masonry contractor for decades. There's other things that I do to really match and coat that to honor the system and the home that we're doing as a professional.
All right. So have you had instances, Mike, where now, you don't do estimates for repair because that's a conflict, in your opinion, to do the inspection and do the recommendation of remediation, and then to do the remediation work itself. But how do I know, if I'm a homeowner and I'm doing a pre-listing stucco inspection, how do I know that that is a fair estimate? And will I usually get a warranty? In other words, if I say to you, well, you don't do the remediation, but I need a name or two, do you refer me to somebody that can do the work that you have faith and confidence in to refer to me as the homeowner?
Yeah, a lot of times people don't know. And we make it a point, because we're on so many homes doing what we just talked about, inspecting something that's been remediated, we have a chance to know a lot of great masonry remediation firms. So depending on geographics, depending on extent of work or things that we've found, there are times where we'll actually recommend to companies. We're not affiliated financially. There's no relationship other than just professional awareness and how they handle themselves. Pricing is strictly between the consumer and the contractor. But one thing we do recommend in one of those scenarios is that you can never know specifically the extent of damage by our protocol system. So classically, if somebody's out there doing the work, there should be some sort of paragraph noted in any remediation contractor contract or scope of work that specifies that there may be unforeseen, and there should be an allowance of X amount of dollars per sheet of plywood and such that sort of addresses that. Because anybody that thinks they're going to go in solely on one of our reports, again, water finds its own way.
Right. And see, that's interesting you say that, because like if you get a roof estimate, you know, typically there are the specifications, but then you're correct. I mean, if they start yanking that roof off, and maybe it's 2 roofs, okay, and then all of a sudden they're pulling the shingles off and the underlayment or whatever, and then the plywood is damaged, which they couldn't determine that initially by the visual, then it's X number of dollars per piece of plywood. So, I mean, the contractor has to protect themselves, but you just want to make sure that you're dealing with somebody reputable.
Sure.
And of course, we discussed a couple of weeks on the show, how do you choose a contractor? Well, you don't necessarily go with the lowest estimate, because that can be a mistake. You find out what's their experience, references. I mean, if somebody is saying to me, to you, Mike, that, well, I'm going to shop you around. It's like sometimes, homeowners want to talk to 3 different realtors and get 3 different, opinions and strategies to sell the house. So if I'm talking to you and I'm going to say, well, Mike, I want to interview you, and I'm going to interview 2 more stucco inspectors to just to do my due diligence. I mean, how do you respond to that?
Look, we live in the world of, here we are, we're communicating. We live in information society, information highway. I
don't mean to put
media,
you on the spot, Mike.
That's
Sorry
good.
about that. Go ahead.
Everything is here. So I encounter that all the time. One of the things that we do at Michelangelo is we actually write a blog of trending information. And we try to take a very proactive approach, educate the community, and not with fear, just with tried and true information, progressive knowledge. How do we get past this? And I think that usually comes out when people speak with me and the way we present ourselves when we're on site. So it's a world of competition. There's other colleagues of mine that are out there, but we're used to being interviewed, just like interviewing contractors.
Right.
We strongly recommend that people get a variety of estimates, because there's divergent methods of how somebody thinks they can do a repair.
Now, I'm going to put you on the spot again. Sorry. I mean, when Vince is here, I always put him on the spot. And Matt, you know that
We'll
too.
see how I fare.
Okay, there you go.
Let's
And
see.
you can always say, I don't want to answer that question, Gary, because it's just too personal, okay? But let's say I've got 3 estimates here to do remediation work. And again, your background is masonry and all that kind of stuff. I mean, would you literally review those 3 for me? And maybe you charge me a fee. I mean, certainly, I don't expect you to give me free advice. So would you look at those 3 estimates and say, well, this is really the one you want to go to, or do you not go there?
I don't direct people based on price. Well, a lot of times what I'm more concerned with is the scope of work.
Well, that was my point. I'm sorry I didn't specify that, but I'm not saying necessarily go with the lowest price, because that can be a big mistake. But will you look over those specs and, I mean, can you determine whether the pricing is fair because of your background?
There are times, again, and today, now that we've removed ourselves, but only recently in the past 5 years, so a lot of the pricing that you see here is not a square foot number when you're building a new home, and I try to drive that point home. It's a different mindset. Somebody told me $14 a square foot for stucco. Well, that's brand new. The sheathing is up, the tar paper or the weather-resistant barrier is there, and you're coming in and doing 40 homes. So for me to qualify the pricing, that's their own pricing. I look more, again, at scope of work. I want to see the manufacturer product that they're using, and I want to see the method that they're employing. So as an added value to the real estate community and the consumer, there are many times after I've done my inspection, I'm on to my new one, it has a tail, and I will literally be reviewing 2 or 3 different scopes of work from a client. You're my client. That's what we've done. That's a service and an added bonus, I believe.
So, Mike, when you're doing inspections, then, are there, like radon? You do a radon inspection, 4 picocuries per liter or more.
Right.
Then they say remediation has to be done. Anything less than 4, it doesn't. I mean, are there regulations that the inspection or the inspector has to follow to determine whether this is a passing stucco inspection or a failed stucco inspection?
That's also one of the things that I've encountered. A lot of people think it's a pass-fail. It's gradation. The 3 numbers that you want to know about are the 0 to 14% of moisture. That is the acceptable moisture content in wood substrate. We're talking about wood. Sometimes there's gypsum board. But our biggest thing is to determine what is the substrate. So if we're talking about moisture, which most hard coat stucco homes are, 0 to 14% is the the green area. It's all good to go.
Okay.
15 to 19 represents there's some moisture going on. It may be as a result of crack, not caulking, some other area where moisture visibly or not visibly has gotten in. It requires some sort of action. Once you get to the 20 to the 40% moisture, 40% is the highest on the meters that we use. Once you get into that range, that is telling you there's much more active moisture, and that's usually coupled with microbial or organic growth. That's the concern that we have. If the wood has not been rotted yet, it's already past that level. So they're the gradations, or they're the application of numbers that we use for people to look at that report. And the contractors really are the recipients of the report. Even though the consumer pays for it, it's really for the professional contractor to determine how they're going to do the repairs based on the readings that were found.
Got it. All right. And then let's say a homeowner does, I don't know if I asked you this question before or not. Let's say a homeowner does a pre-listing inspection, stucco inspection, and then determines minor repairs have to be done, the repairs have been done, and then you're called in to do the inspection for the buyer, and you're coming up with additional things that maybe the first inspector missed. So then, I mean, if I'm representing a seller and I have a clean report with the repairs done, and then the buyer gets a report that, I know it's not pass-fail, but there's additional things that need to be done, I'm going to have those two, now tell me if I'm wrong, I'm going to have those two inspectors talking to each other, because why does one person say it's now passed, it's with the repairs done, and now somebody else is coming in and saying you still have issues?
That's growing as well. We've seen second requests. We've seen where work has been done, and I actually did one yesterday, documented, high readings. What we try to do is, in lieu of the knowledge that there has been another inspection, I don't want to see that report. I want to be as fresh as when I see there. I will see the prior inspection holes, as minor as they may be, and then we try to do the comparison and see those areas. Again, water finds its own way. If I'm 1 inch from somebody else's position of where they went within that same protocol location, moisture may have saddled in one area and not in the other. So it's likely, but again, we never focus so much on one reading or two readings. It's about the overall mapping of the home. So if you see a concentration of higher numbers in those same areas, it's indicative of a problem that's happening and really hasn't been remedied or properly remedied.
All right. Have you ever had situations, Mike, where you go out and you can see that there was a invasive inspection done, and not necessarily a pre-listing by the seller, but it might have been done 3, 4, 5. I mean, can you tell visually roughly when that test was performed?
That's challenging. In the recent market that we have, it may have been 5 years ago. There weren't many of us inspectors. 5, 6 years ago, there may have been, as a result of that initial relocation, they may have had somebody back then for the prior seller. So one of the things that I blog about at Stucco blog, right, we talk about initially, a lot of the sellers didn't know to disclose this or were not disclosing it. And so the first awareness that there was some other full invasive protocol was by me with a buyer at that point, 2, 3, 4 years ago. And I was the first person that identifies that there was an invasive protocol. And the buyer is looking at me as if, no, you're doing the inspection. Well, there was prior. Does anybody have results? It kind of stops the flow of the work process, because now everybody's scrambling to determine if something was or not disclosed. So it could have been something that predates the current seller, but they should be able to provide information from when they bought it, if they were through a relocation firm or not. There should be something that was documenting, probably as late as 7, 8 years ago, some stucco inspections were being performed, but not as a normal due course of real estate in the Delaware Valley.
Do you ever request a copy of the seller disclosure form to see what they have disclosed, what they know or don't know about stucco?
I do ask for that. It's not frequent that I get it a lot of times. A lot of times now, again, with that same data point, that the majority of my work is now driven by current sellers, pre-listing. I don't need to see a report, because they don't have that at this point. I'm sort of their lead-in before they list it. So there really isn't a disclosure that exists yet.
All right. So, Mike, if you're doing an inspection and for the buyer, and let's say the seller did not do a pre-listing inspection and you're doing it specifically for the buyer.
Yes.
How much interaction do you have with that homeowner? Because I'm sure that some homeowners are going to like tailgate you around the property, and I mean, how much you're representing the buyer, you're being paid by the buyer, so how much interaction or communication do you have with that seller who's basically on the other side?
We encounter that a fair amount of time, and I think I have to give credit to my wife on this, because having seen the whole transparency of the real estate world of buyers and sellers and cooperating agents, I really understand my way around that marketplace. It's the seller's home. It is their home till it's not sold anymore. And the buyers are there, so I have engagement with the seller and the seller's agent, but the information that I share, which they see if I'm performing, is them to know. It's their home. But I also stress to the point to them that I am really there on behalf of the buyer and the transaction, but my communication has to be solely with the buyer's agent and the buyer themselves. The report will follow, and then we can have open dialogue. If they want to have an overall conference call, I'm always willing to do that.
Because the Pennsylvania Agreement of Sale says that the seller has a right to inspection reports, from the person that the report was prepared for, i.e. the buyer, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to release that report to the seller without the buyer's authorization. Do you have a form that you have the buyer to sign to allow you to do that?
I do. Typically, I'll either email them or send a form that allows me to disperse it to somebody other than the agent or the buyer who signed the authorization form initially.
All right, Michael, good conversation. We're going to go for break number 2. Matt, take us away, and we'll be back shortly.
Planning to go to the game? Give LimoToday.com a call. You'll get to the game and back safely and in style. Why worry about the traffic and parking when you can relax and let LimoToday.com do the driving for you and your friends? And if you book a 5-hour trip with LimoToday.com, you'll get the 6-hour free. From sedans to minibuses to vans and stretch limos, let LimoToday.com get you to the game. Give them a call at 1-866-LIMO-TODAY. That's 1-866-LIMO-TODAY.
Hi, this is Governor Tom Wolf. Thousands of families across Pennsylvania have been affected by the opioid epidemic. Together, we can fight this disease. If you or someone you know is struggling with addiction, help is available. Visit pa.gov/opioids for resources and information on substance abuse. For treatment options, call 1-800-662-HELP.
Brought to you by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Tom Wolf, Governor. Paid for with Pennsylvania taxpayer dollars.
Hello, this is Vince Sirianni from GMH Mortgage and your host to Opening Doors to Real Estate and Finance, inviting you to join me and my co-host Gary Castle, broker-owner of Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, Keystone Properties, every Thursday morning, 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. here on 1490 WBCB, and also Sunday mornings, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. on 610 Sports Radio. Opening Doors to Real Estate and Finance, helping you acquire your dream home.
Home stretch here on Opening Doors to Real Estate and Finance without Vince Sirianni, but Gary Castle's here.
Well, Vince is going to be here next week, that's for sure. And Vince, we still miss you dearly, but as I said, I'm working on the agenda for next week.
Don't
so
feel
Matt,
bad for him, Gary, because he's in Florida right now, man.
He's in sunshine and he's working. He's not working, I don't think. So
That's right.
Anyway, I am Gary Castle, broker-owner of Berkshire Hathaway Keystone Properties, 215-450-2373. And we have Mike Spadaccini, Stucco inspector. So how do we reach you, Mike? And fire away.
Gary, thanks again for having me. This is Mike from Michelangelo Masonry. You can reach us at 215-378-2056, or you can send us an email at stuccotesting@gmail.com.
Good. All right, Matt, during the break, you posed a very interesting question, so fire away.
Once in a while I do this, yes. But it's such an interesting topic, like you mentioned, the stucco, because it's something that I think when people think of home repairs, they think this is something I can maybe manage myself. And, you know, what do you tell either the buyer, like Gary mentioned, of a new home, or the seller? It says there's certain repairs I think I can do myself. Maybe stucco's one of them. They're reluctant to maybe do that.
So Matt, that's interesting because today we keep talking about the progression and trending of awareness, and with that trend or awareness is the growing knowledge and almost expectation of the buyer, of the consumers buying homes today. There's, again, we're now in the positive economy, and we have new construction that buyers are vacillating over buying new or buying a pre-owned home. So I think in order for a seller to stay engaged in not having a buyer break from them and go to the new construction, they need to be very proactive in doing the repairs, especially if there's been a pre-listing inspection. So the buyers are not only asking for a potential stucco inspection report, but they're looking to see the entire tether. They're looking to see the scope of work from the contractor we've talked about. They're looking as far as, can we see a copy of the check that shows that payment's been made?
Wow.
That this hasn't just been a scope of work that somebody did it by themselves. So there's really this tail. Everything progresses on, and it's just not one piece of information, but it's a series of information to close the chapter on the stucco report and remediation.
Good answer. Now, a question then. Let's say the house has to be totally redone. I mean, the stucco has to be removed, and there's damage behind the stucco, the wood members and so forth. And the homeowner says to you, well, I don't want to replace the stucco with stucco because I don't want to have another problem 5 or 10 years down the line. Yeah. What are the other alternatives that, a homeowner can install rather than installing stucco?
Sure. We have scenarios where, provided if you live in a community that actually has restrictions on products, type of products, i.e. Window treatments, shutters, whether you're allowed to have screen doors or not, etc. They may also have limitations on what type of cladding system that you're authorized to do. But we've seen several scenarios, especially last year, where we had done invasive inspection. The front and rear of the home had excessive damage. The seller on their own took all 4 sides off when the 2 left and right sides were not damaged, and they put all siding, vinyl siding, and that was an allowable alternative in that community that they lived in. Right. There are some other communities that will not allow that. So you may be able to use something like a James Hardie Corporation, which is a concrete type of board, or again, there's a variety of cedar products. The hard part is the aesthetic. There's certain times where the stucco look in a Mediterranean style or a custom farm of Bucks County, and it's clad with stucco that's more hard coat today. Putting something else that looks a little more contrived or contemporary may not fit with there, so there's an aesthetic value I think that you need to make besides the alternative of doing vinyl siding or doing some sort of hardy board.
And the point's well taken, because in some of these communities, there's a lot of new communities that are being built, at least in my area in Pennsylvania, where there's a homeowners association, and if you're living obviously in a condo or a planned unit development or whatever, if there's an association, you need to bounce things off of the association, the property manager first, before you say, oh, well, I'm going to, put this color stucco on, or I'm going to, remove the stucco and put siding or whatever. So I think that's a very, very good point you made there. Yeah. So now, can you paint stucco?
That's a great question. According to my uncles that came from Italy many years ago,
Spadaccini,
Campalone, everyone.
Go ahead.
You were never supposed to paint stucco. For kind of when we first started the show, stucco is porous. It's a Portland cement product, and today there's a lot more polymers and additives that are into the acrylic world of bonding agents in the newer stucco applications. But today they've also revolutionized a lot of the painting products that make the fix to stucco. They call it elastomeric, and there's a variety of the big name outfits that that have products that once you've done a stucco inspection and you've sort of verified that there's no real damage behind there, or if anything you fixed it, and you decide to put a uniform professional application of an elastomeric paint, it's a breathable product. Like anything, you don't want to keep overlapping and keep painting that every so many years. This is something that should be durable for 10, 15 years at minimum, and breathable. That's the key.
Okay. Now, you said your wife is a Berkshire Hathaway agent in New Hope, I think you had said. I'm going to put you on the spot, Mike.
Okay.
I should have really forewarned
She'll
you
love
about
the plug.
this. All right, there you go. Yeah, well, what's her number? What's her name, by the way?
It's Sharon Spadaccini.
What's her number?
So her phone number is 215
Okay.
862 6404.
All right. Now, Sharon calls you up and says, I need a stucco inspection. Can you do that?
That's a great question, because her and I try to not do that for any potential conflict. So if it's something for me, again, I have colleagues that I'll recommend to her to have somebody do that. So just in the event that somebody would feel that there would be a reason for it. There are just times where client base, we may socialize and we may know them personally, and it is paramount that I'm doing the inspection for them. So that does happen, but for the most part, I try not to jeopardize that.
Now, just remember that with full disclosure, there's not a problem there. Okay, as long as your wife discloses that you're the stucco inspector, you're her husband and so forth, and the buyer acknowledges that. I mean, a lot of times, buyers will come to us and say, I have no idea who to call for a home inspector. I have no idea who to call for a termite guy, a radon person. Okay,
Certainly.
Can you recommend? And I've said on this show before, realtors, you have to be careful. Because what we do is we will not say go to this one inspector, go to this one inspector, because we use them all the time. I mean, that's dangerous stuff, okay? However, we can provide a list of people that the consumer can check, do their due diligence, okay? Get their experience, get their cost factors and so forth. And then we actually have the consumer sign that form saying that we've given this for courtesy purposes, and you do your due diligence, but, we don't get any remuneration from these people. We get no monetary rewards and so forth. But we have the consumer sign that. So does that make sense?
It does make sense. Again, for that reason, I never write a specific name in any report. I usually will give people 3 to 4 names of masonry contractors. Again, I'll say, I have seen their work. I've been involved where I've been asked to photo document their remediation work. Okay. So I see, as a masonry guy, I see how they stage work. I see how they keep the home during the process, which is another critical factor when you're dealing, with the home repair, right? So you want to make sure that it's all about the whole picture, not just the pricing aspect. So I will recommend 3 to 4 names, and it's really up to them of who they choose and who they kind of synchronized with.
All right, so our listeners can't call you to do any masonry work at this point. That is beyond your scope, because now you're strictly doing stucco inspection.
That's a fair statement. It's nice to get my hands on a trowel once in a while if there's a partial rainy day, because we can't do stucco inspections, by the way. You don't want to do them in the rain.
You're reading my mind. Go ahead.
Yeah,
talk about that. Go ahead.
So what happens is we're using probes that are coated and are going behind the stucco, but you also don't want to give something where there's been excessive rain 24 hours before, wind-driven rain, snow events, because they can potentially artificially raise moisture or concentration in an area. It's still getting moisture behind there, but it may be giving a higher reading than it may have experienced, but it's still indicative of a problem that's happening. Okay. So for that reason, we usually try to have a day like today, or even yesterday afternoon was decent to start. So when we have 38 degrees and rising temperatures, and we have sunny days, are really where we're at. So that sometimes will cause the backlog, which is why we don't do the masonry work anymore, because this is a 7-day a week.
Right.
We also feel that we don't want to have a compromise or a conflict of interest by writing a report and then turning around and doing the repairs. We focus solely, we've redirected our masonry career, and we're specializing in doing the stucco inspections.
And where do you practice? I mean, your wife is in the New Hope area with Berkshire Hathaway.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what areas, if it's the right term, do you specialize in? Because I know you said, here in Levittown, there's a lot of brick construction. There's not a lot of stucco houses here, but with new construction, maybe a different story.
Yes.
So where do you focalize in?
It obviously starts in your backyard. So we're in Solbury. We're in New Hope, Pennsylvania. So Always Bucks County, always Montgomery County, and a bit of Delaware. That's where the big sprawl of growth of building the late 90s, early 2000s. That's the area that we encounter. We are nationally licensed. I'm a nationally licensed inspector for EDI, as I mentioned, Exterior Design Institute, but I'm also a national instructor for the EPA. I've actually done training in Texas, Carolinas. I've done work in New York State. I've done Washington. But I am licensed for EDI nationally, but I am in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as a Stucco inspector.
Oh, so you cross state lines?
I can if I chose to. As of right now, with the volume we have, we're right here. But potential growth would be New Jersey. It's a sister, to Bucks County, right to Pennsylvania on the border of Lambertville area.
Right.
But right now they have a different requirement. So right now I am solely licensed in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as being a Stucco inspector, but I am nationally licensed through EDI as a Stucco inspector.
And how long does it normally take, I don't know if I asked you this before, to get your report once you've inspected?
Typically, depending on the size of the home, we get some big homes that are 7,000 and 8,000 square foot, but for the most part, 48 to 72 hours from the departure of our inspection, you will have that report delivered to whoever the consumer is, seller or buyer.
Okay. Have you ever gone to an inspection where, sometimes the home inspector is viewed by the seller as the enemy, and sometimes the buyer is viewed by the seller, and the buyer's agent is viewed by the seller as the enemy. And it never ceases to amaze me that I still experience that after being a broker for 42 years. I mean, do you ever sense that the seller is not welcoming you to their property to do your inspection?
Yeah, I think it's that anticipation. Especially when somebody's truly maintained a home. And the issue here with the Stucco inspection is that we talked about visual. This is not visual, this is forensic. And what happens is that the seller is truly hanging on every reading if they're there. And the reason why is they've done such a great job in maintaining and making potential additions to their home that they really have not seen anything. And so they're just as concerned for this checkup, so to speak, as the buyer is.
Right.
The buyer may be more concerned because we're going to walk from this type of thought process, but the seller's not walking from it. They're now saddled potentially with the financial implication here. So I think sometimes for the seller, it's a dual concern. There's somebody coming in and do this invasive thing. I don't know this person. He's got the credentials, but I don't know him. He's doing it for the buyer, and if the buyer walks, I'm left with this. So I think that's I won't say animosity, but I think that's the fear factor or the concern they have. That's what I experience.
Now,
it's emotion.
Do you say something on your reports that this is a report prepared only for the client being the buyer or the seller, but it doesn't prevent the person, once they get a copy of the report, to distribute it to wherever it has to go?
That is encountered frequently. We do have language in our contract as well as in our report. It's proprietary. There's a lot of information that is done through EDI, or they've set this up, but there's a lot of other things as far as a template or language that we use that is ours. Mm-hmm. And they say sometimes that there is the need to take this form and distribute it. The purpose of it is really to limit it so it's just not kind of out on the street for everybody to look at. There's a lot of personal information that's here. It doesn't have people's social security numbers or other information that's related to there, but it's private information regarding to the transaction. So if somebody's related to the transaction, a buyer or a seller's contractor, general contractor, home inspector, we do authorize them. I will limit the distribution of this document via an email authorization to that consumer to send it to that person. But that's the purpose. It's protective both ways. For the homeowner, they don't want that knowledge necessarily to go out until they're able and prepared to repair something.
All right, so, and maybe you've answered this question, but if you do a report for a buyer, and let's say a seller calls you up a day or two later after the report's been submitted to the buyer, and wants clarification on something, then do you limit your discussion, or do you get the buyer's authorization first to be able to call that seller back and have a conversation with the seller?
Yes, and in that scenario, and that happens, my first call is to the agent for the buyer. It's that same transparency. I've got a phone call. Just want to let you know I have not replied to the email or the phone request. If you'd like me to create a conference call, I'm happy to do that. If you'd like me to speak to that person, I'm happy to, but it's limited to what's relative to that report. But I would prefer having a conference call so you can ask the questions or hear, what we're saying. I don't want to call that person until I've had your authorization.
Awesome. Good. We are winding down here, Mike Spadaccini and Matt Miro. It's been a pleasure having both of you guys in the arena today. And Mike, how do we reach you again?
It's Michelangelo Masonry, 215-378-2056, or Stucco Testing at gmail.com. Thanks again for having me today,
Oh,
Gary.
you're very, very welcome.
Matt,
very
thank
informative. My name's Gary Castle, broker owner of Berkshire Hathaway Keystone Properties, 215-450-2373. Vince, we will see you next week in the arena here. And as I say at the end of every show, thanks so much for tuning in, folks.